Coming up on Messenger, today's episode takes us to a pivotal moment in Jonah's journey. From the depths of the belly of the fish, Jonah repented and turned back to God, discovering the power of his forgiveness and grace. We'll also hear from Naomi Zita, a pathfinder at Bowmanville Seventh-day Adventist Church in Ontario, as she shares a fun and meaningful activity about learning to trust and have faith. Plus, we're joined by the Really Living podcast team. Hannah Navarro, Ashley Lindo, and Lauren Davis will share how their podcast is inspiring young adults to grow in their faith and live for Christ. Stay tuned for an uplifting and powerful episode. Hello and welcome to Messenger. I'm Adriana, and I'm so glad you're here for another episode of Hope and Encouragement. Today, we're diving into Jonah's remarkable moment of repentance. After running from God and ending up in the belly of a fish, Jonah cried out to God in prayer. In Jonah 2, verses 1 and 2, Jonah says, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry." This powerful moment reminds us that no matter how far we've run or how deep we've fallen, God is always ready to forgive and restore us when we turn back to Him. It's a story of second chances, grace, and transformation. But Jonah's journey isn't just about his repentance. It's about what we can learn about God's character and his relentless love for us. And today's episode is filled with stories and lessons that tie into that theme. One of the ways we learn to trust God is through the experiences we face and the lessons He teaches us. Our Pathfinder segment today is all about building faith and discovering God's presence in every situation. Naomi Zita, a Pathfinder at Bowmanville Seventh-day Adventist Church in Ontario, is here to share a special activity with us. Over to you, Naomi.
Hey Pathfinders, welcome back. Have you ever heard of someone being swallowed by a big fish and living to tell that story? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jonah. Today we're picking up right where we left off in Jonah's story. He tried to run away from God, but instead of giving up on Jonah, God used an amazing way to get back his attention, a big fish. We'll also talk about some incredible fish from the ocean, including the biggest fish in the world, and a few others with super cool abilities. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's dive right in. So remember that huge storm we talked about in the last segment? Well, after Jonah was thrown into the sea, the storm stopped, just like he said it would. But Jonah wasn't safe yet. God had a very special plan for him. As Jonah sank into the water, something incredible happened. A big fish appeared and swallowed him whole. Now, Jonah wasn't just floating in the water anymore. He was inside the belly of a big fish. Can you imagine what that must feel like? Must have been dark, smelly, and kind of scary. But Jonah didn't give up. While he was inside the fish, he prayed to God, thanking him and asking for help. Jonah realized that he couldn't escape from God, and he needed to obey him. He prayed, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me." God heard Jonah's prayer and kept him safe inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, after Jonah had prayed and promised to obey God, the fish swam to shore and Jonah was spit out onto dry land. Can you imagine how grateful Jonah must have been to be free from that fish? It was a big lesson for him about God's mercy, protection, and the importance of following his plan. Now let's talk about fish. After hearing about Jonah's big fish, I bet you're wondering, what kind of fish could be big enough to swallow a man? So let me tell you about some cool fish that live in the ocean. First up is the whale shark. This is the biggest fish in the world. These gentle giants can grow up to 40 feet long and weigh over 20 tons. Now you might be wondering, just how big is that? Well, 40 feet is about the size of a school bus. Even though they are enormous, whale sharks eat tiny creatures like plankton. Isn't it amazing how such a big fish can survive on such small food? Now we are moving on to a very small sea creature, the mantis shrimp. Although they might be small, it's one of the coolest creatures in the ocean. It has a super fast punch that can break shells and even crack glass. The mantis shrimp can also see more colors than humans, making it one of the most colorful and fascinating creatures underwater. You may have seen these fish in the movie, Finding Nemo. These are called clownfish. Now here's something really cool about the clownfish. Did you know that all clownfish are born male? But if the female in their group dies, the biggest male will actually change into a female to take her place. Isn't that wild? God designed them to adapt to their environment in such an amazing way. But wait, don't go yet. I still have one more amazing fish to share with you. This one is called the lanternfish. It's like the glow stick of the ocean, basically. These tiny fish live in the deep sea and have special organs that produce light, called bioluminescence. They use this light to attract food and confuse their predators. Even though they're only about 6 inches long, which is the length of my hand, lanternfish are super important because they're one of the most common fish in the world and a major food source for other sea creatures. Isn't it amazing to think about the incredible fish God has created in the ocean? From the gigantic whale shark to the tiny but mighty mantis shrimp, every creature shows us how creative and powerful God is. So, Pathfinders, the next time you learn about the ocean or visit an aquarium, remember Jonah's story and think about how God used a big fish to teach Jonah an important lesson. And don't forget to be amazed by all the wonderful fish that live in God's world. I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Naomi, for that wonderful activity. It's such a great reminder of how we can trust God and build our faith step by step. Now, let's shift gears to our Fresh Faith segment. Today, we're excited to hear from the Really Living podcast team from the Hamilton Seventh-day Adventist Church in Ontario. This incredible podcast is led by Hannah Navarro, Ashley Lindo, and Lauren Grace, who are inspiring young adults to grow in their faith and embrace the calling to live for Christ. Ladies, welcome to Messenger. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to start the Really Living podcast, and how did the idea come about?
Yeah, so I personally love listening to podcasts. It's one of my favorite pastimes, and I know a lot of other young adults like listening to podcasts too, even people of all ages. And so I honestly pitched it to our young adult team. I was like, guys, I think we should start a podcast. I think it would be a great way to reach not just the young adults and people within our church, but also young adults and people within our local community and beyond. And so they were for it. So we wrote up a proposal, we presented it to the board of our church, and they approved. And then we spent the next couple of months kind of working out the details as to how it would all come together. And then we started filming in the fall, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Each of you brings a unique perspective to the podcast. How did your individual strengths and experiences shape the direction and topics of the podcast?
Yeah, I would say I can start. My background is in broadcast journalism. So while I was in school, I was an executive podcast producer. I specialized in radio. I've worked in the TV industry in Canada. So I feel like that gave me a background to understand how to formulate an episode, because I think if you go into something without the background, you may think, okay, well, let's just start talking. But there is some direction that you do need even to have an informal conversation that's being presented on a camera. And
Yes.
so I think the strength that I brought was being able to have a script ready based on our topic and lead the conversation so that it is informal, but it is actually secretly perhaps formal.
You've chosen to focus on young adults and real life challenges. Why is this group such an important audience for your message?
I think to answer that question, back to almost the topics that we selected for the podcast itself, it started with we wanted to share what we were learning in our own young adult group during our Bible studies. We have weekly Bible studies on Friday nights, and we were studying different themes like steps to Christ. We also finished the book of Job. We also studied and went through kind of a series of societal issues and how they apply like to us living in the culture that we live in today. And so that kind of tied into why we chose those certain topics, and yeah, that's kind of why we chose those.
That's great.
Yeah.
The podcast launched in October 2024. What has been the most rewarding part of the journey so far?
I think just hearing the feedback, it's been really positive so far. Our church members that have listened, and then I've shared it with some of my friends as well that are not in the church, and they've also really enjoyed it too. So it's just been really awesome to see that people are really engaging with the content that we're putting out, and yeah, we hope to keep doing that.
Yeah. My experience with feedback has been really positive, even just on my own personal social medias. So there are people that like are following me that I'm friends with from my secular life, like when I was in university or when I was in high school, and getting them to like respond or like something or reach out to me after I've posted like a clip of it on my social media is really nice, because those are people that really otherwise wouldn't be interested, quite frankly, in church, religion, and so to be able to post just a 20-minute clip from the actual segment onto my own platform is nice, because then I'm reaching out to people that traditionally wouldn't listen to something like this.
That's wonderful. Social media is a big part of your outreach. How has it helped you engage with your audience and grow your community?
Yeah, I think I can speak on this a little bit. I do a good chunk of the social media management for our young adult group, and I think it not only has helped us grow in terms of sharing our podcast and the messages that we've been learning, but also just attracting people to our young adult group and showing that, you know, learning about Jesus, spending time with Jesus can be fun. And that was our whole purpose, not only with the podcast, but also just with our group as a foundation. So it's been a really instrumental tool in terms of, not only sharing the messages that we have, but also inviting people to come in and join those conversations that we're having.
That's awesome. What's next for the Really Living podcast? Do you have any exciting plans for the future?
Well, we're going to be wrapping up season 1, which has been a focus on steps to Christ. However, we are not marketing it as being steps to Christ specific. And we know that sometimes when you are introducing Adventist topics to the broader Christian world, when you bring up names like Ellen White, it can already put people's backs up against the wall. And so what we're trying to do is take the content within that book and bring it to our audience without them necessarily knowing where it's from. And so once they listen to it and say, wait, this is really amazing, this is inspiring, once they'll find out that it is from there, it will allow them to have an avenue to have less of a bias, maybe picking up that book for themselves in the future. So that's been kind of our goal with this season. As it's wrapping up, we're probably going to then decide to pivot into what was our next Bible study that we did on Friday nights. And I think we started to do the book of Job pretty much immediately. Oh, no, incorrect. We did mainstream Christian topics. So controversies within that. So for example, we talked about sex before marriage, just dating, a lot of relationship type things. So I think that will be a really great bridge, because the Steps to Christ season was definitely foundational, Jesus loves you, Christian focus, whereas this is going to be a bit more of a conversation. So I think we're going to have more ability to attract more people to listen, but then those people in turn want to return to the episodes we've already done to get that foundation. So I think just making sure we continue our Friday night studies so that we'll always have content to put onto the podcast.
Yeah, that's really unique. What message do you want your listeners to take away from the Really Living podcast?
I think for me personally, kind of what we kind of touched upon before is that talking about Jesus, having these discussions, inviting him into your life, it can be fun. It can be interesting. It doesn't have to be this boring conversation where you're just talking about rules and what you can and cannot do. It can be an open-ended conversation and lead you to fall in love with Jesus. And so I think ultimately, I think we can all kind of agree on this, is that, we want people to fall in love with Him.
Yeah. And also feel welcome to come to and experience our church as well in person, to show that we go through a lot of the same experiences in lives and within our lives. And so, yeah, our place, we're open, we're welcome, and we want people to come in and to engage with Jesus, not just on the screen, but also in person as well, to continue to build those relationships and connections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even expanding. I remember Ashley had mentioned in the beginning when she had brought up the idea of having a podcast, we had that discussion like, well, what's going to make us different, you know, because there's a million podcasts out there, especially Christian podcasts. So really what separates us from the others? What can we do? And I think what we're trying to do, or at least my personal goal with it, is to bring an Adventist flavor to it, but that's not so in your face. So like I had said in the previous question before, but eventually talking about topics such as the Sabbath or the state of the dead, because those aren't the Christian mainstream norm in terms of belief. So being able to bring those, but in a very biblical and loving way, and also fun way, to say, you know, we're not just boring on Friday night, like just open your Bible, turn to chapter 1, and this is what it is, done. We actually socialize. If you look at our social media that Hannah's really great at, you can see we all have a really close bond. And so we want other people to be able to join us.
That's very uplifting. And what advice would you give to young adults who want to start a faith-based project?
Just go for it. Yeah, I don't know. I just think if it's something that you feel as if you're called to, reach out, like talk about it amongst your young adult group. Yeah, there's no harm in just tossing out the idea, and the Lord will kind of lead you down that path. And so, yeah, just trust in that and know that there's people behind you. And it may not seem like it all the time. You may seem like you're alone in whatever ideas you may have, but you're not. There's so many supporters behind you within our local church, and I think that we've really seen that since we started our podcast. So yeah, I would just say go for it.
That's great, to be brave. How do you see the Really Living podcast evolving over the next few years?
I would like to see just more integration of not only people that, you know, are currently a part of the team and that attend our young adult studies, but also people from different churches coming and talking, discussing even of a different, you know, demographics in terms of age. Like obviously we said it's more young adult focused, but we would love to have, you know, pastors and even just people from different professions to come and share maybe their testimonies and stuff like that. And I would also love to see, you know, other people lead and take charge and see how it evolves in that way.
Yeah.
Good.
Of course, I was going to say, you know, I think we're shooting for the stars. We have a pastor, Pastor Jose. He's been also really helpful in putting this together for us. So shout out to him.
Yes.
But he definitely encourages us to shoot for the stars. So listen, I'm ready to have 1 million subscribers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Because I think when you think about it, it would be great if we were impacting those who live in our immediate region, which is Hamilton, to get people to actually come. But I think we can also recognize that majority of the people who do have an opportunity to listen are probably not even in Hamilton. And so being able to take what we do as young adults at Really Living and expand it not only within our 4 walls of our church would be a really beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Yes, amazing. If someone hasn't listened to the podcast before, what would you say is a good starting point for them to begin?
Episode 1.
Yeah.
It's episode 1
Yeah.
is literally Steps to Christ chapter 1, which is how much are you worth, and really recognizing that you're worth the price that was paid for you, and that's the cross. And so, like we've kind of said, our goal is to get people to Christ, and maybe introduce them to a little bit of Adventist flair as well with that. And so episode 1, and which is actually to your question about a favorite moment, my favorite moment is episode 1, because it was like, what is this going to be?
Yeah.
You know, we were just sitting there, and we're all friends, but you know, there's these cameras around us. We put money to make this little studio in our church, and there's an expectation that something has to come out of this. And so I think my favorite was honestly as soon as we started rolling and our conversations were flowing, and there were some authentic moments in it. And yeah, so that was really nice.
Yeah, and I think also to add to that, I think we've done a really great job of making like a gradual build-up, right? Like Lauren said, we did kind of walk through for season 1 Steps to Christ. And so it goes in chronological order and it builds each episode you move. And so it's really, really easy to follow if you just start at number 1. And if you want to get a taste, go to our social media, go to our Instagram. You can see short clips of it and you can see, you know, all the great things that we talk about.
Yeah, and on the top point of short clips, we try to keep our episodes within around 20 to 30 minutes so that it's not, the long form content isn't too long so people can stay engaged. So yeah, we're to the point, we're concise, but it's very rich with information and knowledge that I think anyone would benefit from.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. Each of you brings a unique perspective to the podcast. How did your individual strengths and experiences shape the direction and topics of the podcast?
For sure. I think I'll start. For me, like we said, this was based off of our young adult group. And as one of the leaders who leads out, you know, every other Friday night or so, I think just as taking that position as leader of hosting a Bible study, kind of bringing that to the podcast and hosting it as well, I think was one of the things that I was able to contribute in terms of just being a delegator, asking questions, keeping the conversation flowing, and also providing like the foundation and basis for the knowledge that we were going to be sharing in the episode. And outside of that, I think also strengths in terms of digital creativity, just helping, you know, put stuff together in terms of editing the episode. Lauren helps upload it, manage it, and just sharing it on social media as well. I have a bit of background in that as well. And so just making sure that what we're creating gets out there into people's faces and making it look attractive as well, I think is something that I've been able to happily contribute.
That's great.
Yeah, these girls are great at being the leaders, the host, formulating and all that stuff. I like to say I like to talk. So I like to just be on the episodes as well, participating and sharing my own personal experiences based off of the topics, whatever it is that we're talking about. So yeah, it's great to be a part of the episodes. I'm not on every episode. I don't think we're all on every episode, or maybe. Okay, yeah. But yeah, just being able to kind of share your own personal opinion and perspective to kind of continue the conversation is something that I've really enjoyed being a part of. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and for myself, my background is in broadcast media, so I've worked within the Canadian media landscape as a producer for television and for podcast radios. So I think being able to kind of come in and bring that structure to say, okay, this is how it should actually formulate, was very helpful, because sometimes if you go into something like that's going to be filmed and you say you want to keep the conversation casual, that's great in theory, but there is still a formality about putting something together. And so it's really important that at least one person or your hosts are guided by something. And it's not a full script like where you're reading an actual teleprompter, but you do have something in front of you as your questions and even backup questions to kind of fill in the air and even answer some of the questions yourself, because ideally it's nice to get one take. And sometimes that doesn't always happen, but that's the ideal situation that I was taught. Try to get it all in one take, because it'll make for a much easier editing process for our editors. These are long I mean, as she said, they are shorter, but it's different from editing a minute clip versus a 20-minute clip, right?
Right.
So yeah, just providing, I think, a bit of the structure of how something can be created has been what I've been helpful with.
That's great. Do you have any last thoughts you want to leave with our viewers?
Yeah, I think that something that's been really beautiful about this is that it's forced us, essentially. I know I'm using the word beautiful and then saying forced, so maybe a little counterintuitive, but it has made each of us, not only the people hosting, but also the people that are being the guests, to be intentional about studying our Bible, right? Yes. And so ultimately that's the ultimate goal, is to make sure we're all, especially as young people, really in our Bibles and knowing what we're talking about. And so whether you're in an editing role or you're in a listening role, you're a guest, you're a host, all these things have forced us, in a sense, to open up our Bibles and become experts about what we're doing, because we don't want to be fake, right? If we're going to be putting out content out there into the world on the internet, we want to make sure that we ourselves are authentic to that. And so a part of that is knowing what you're speaking about and living out that as well. So I think it's been really great for that, and also for forming our own friendships, you know. your young adult years, I believe, are where you really formulate those strong friendships for the rest of your life. And we're so lucky to be in a position where we have a lot of young adults and we're all eager to serve God. And so how great that we can all come together and kind of create core memories. You know, we're all going to look back on this in 10, 15 years and say, remember when we were, and I'm sure at that point it'll be led by maybe new people, but we're going to be like, we were the original. So yeah, it's been really great, and just foundationing our own faith and friendships as well.
An additional note for anybody watching would be just to give an invitation to, listen, not only listen, but to participate. And so you can go to our Instagram, to our YouTube, and just submit your questions, submit your comments, and anything that you want to see, us discuss or talk about or touch on. We're more than happy to implement that into our podcast, and we would love, feedback and also just input, because we are here to not only serve God, but serve others. And so, just an invitation for all.
Yeah, and it's very accessible to find us. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, so whether in your car driving to work or whether you're at home doing dishes, like, it's very easy to pop up one of our episodes and to have a listen. So, yeah.
That's so exciting. Thank you all for sharing your insights and for the work you're doing. The Really Living podcast is such a meaningful ministry, and we're thrilled to see how it continues to grow. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
As we reflect on Jonah's story, we're reminded that repentance is a powerful act of turning back to God. Just like how Jonah discovered God's mercy in the belly of the fish, we can also experience his grace when we call out to him. Today's episode has shown us how faith can grow in so many ways. Whether it's through activities like Naomi's Pathfinder segment or meaningful conversations like the ones shared by the Really Living podcast team, God is always working to draw us closer to him. If today's discussion has inspired you, consider subscribing to the Canadian Adventist Messenger Magazine. You can receive a free subscription through your local Seventh-day Adventist Church in Canada, or opt for a yearly subscription for just $20. You can also make a difference by becoming an agent of hope and supporting this ministry. Your participation helps us continue spreading God's love and message of hope. To donate, visit agentsofhope.ca, where you can share by debit, credit, Apple Pay, or Google Pay. E-transfers are also accepted at agentsofhope@hopetv.ca. You can mail a check payable to Hope Channel Canada to the following address: Hope Channel Canada, 1148 King Street East, Oshawa, Ontario, L1H1H8. Or give us a call at 1-855-4HOPE-TV. That is 1-855-446-7388. Thank you for being with us today. Keep spreading hope and being a messenger in your community.